my favorite class today. Today, boys and girls, we're going to talk about tornadoes. We're going to talk about tornadoes, how they're formed, where they're formed, why they're formed, and the damage they cause, how they're measured. In Nova Scotia, there are 3 documented tornadoes. If you go to, there's a Wikipedia page at Canadian tornadoes. If you go to that page, you will see documentation of, I believe, 3 in Nova Scotia. The first one being in the mid-1950s in south of Halifax, White Point, I believe, and it was in January during our cold weather. The most recent one I remember being reported on the news, it was in the Pugwash area, and it was in 1999. There are no deaths that I am aware of from tornadoes in Nova Scotia. There were tornadoes, or have been tornadoes in other provinces and territories in Canada, and there have been tornadoes in everywhere else in the world, except there's no documentation of them in Antarctica. Not that they haven't happened there, just that we haven't seen any. Not a lot of people live in Antarctica. Actually, nobody lives in Antarctica. Just a research station we have there. Okay, so what can I tell you? The vast majority of tornadoes occur on our continent, North America, and they occur in the United States. There's between the Rocky Mountains and the eastern seaboard, there's an area known as Tornado Alley, and that's where the vast majority of tornadoes on our planet occur. The season for tornadoes, like hurricanes, there is a season. The season is before hurricane season. It is from now, and now I'm filming this in May. So the hurricane season is May, June, predominantly in the United States, in the east and in the central United States. There will be, on average, a little more than 50 deaths every year attributed to tornadoes. There is a rating scale for tornadoes. It's called an EF scale. It goes from 0, meaning wind speeds of the tornado are around about 130 kilometers an hour, perhaps a little more, and very little damage. The scale goes to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it is based on both wind speed and damage that the tornado causes. What can I tell you? How are they formed? Tornadoes are formed when air on the ground is traveling one way and air above is traveling another way, and they're in vastly different temperatures. What happens is when they start to mix, we get a column of air, and the column of air, when the upper atmospheric air and the lower ground air, the ground air is very warm and rises, and the atmospheric air is cold and sinks. When they start to mix, generally what has to happen is there has to be an inversion. There has to be a mechanism where they shift up. Usually you see that where the column, the rotating cylindrical column of air starts to rotate up like this. Usually that happens where you see the formation of wall clouds. Wall clouds, just as the name says, appear to be clouds that are vertical in atmospheric air. And when people notice that in the Tornado Alley area of the United States, they take notice, because formation of a tornado is very likely. From the time a tornado is noticed to the time it's reported, let me give you an example. If we were in an area where there was tornadoes and we were living in the central United States, the time that you would get a notification of a tornado versus the time the tornado hits usually runs around 10-15 minutes. So you don't have a lot of time to prepare. Usually when the tornadoes rotate, they follow the rotational patterns of hurricanes. They rotate usually in the northern hemisphere in a counterclockwise direction. That, however, is not an absolute. There are sometimes, because of because of variance, there are some tornadoes that turn in clockwise patterns, but that's not the norm. The rule is if tornadoes form in counterclockwise formations in the northern hemisphere. What else can I tell you? They're fed. Okay, they're fed by a combination of three different winds coming from three different directions, or initiated, I should say, rather than fed. Usually, we get in the central United States in Tornado Alley, you get cold air coming from us, and we give it to the United States. Cold air coming from Canada because Canada is colder than the United States. So warm air comes from Canada down through Tornado Alley. Dry air comes from the lee side of the Rocky Mountains. It's usually the predominant wind patterns that hit the Rocky Mountains. When they hit the Rocky Mountains and they're raised in the upper atmosphere, they lose their moisture. So they're dry going over the Rocky Mountains. And warm, moist air coming up from the Caribbean. When you have those three air masses converging, you're setting the stage for the development of tornadoes. The biggest recorded tornado happened in Bangladesh 10 or 15 years ago, and there was about 1,300 people, I believe, killed. Tornadoes are most prominent in the United States, but they've occurred on all continents except for Antarctica. Oh, I think that's it. The EF scale, I will send a copy of that. It goes from to your webmail. It goes from 0, which is a measure of hurricane destruction. It goes from 0, 130 kilometer an hour winds, little destruction, to 5. 5 being the highest on the scale. That's massive wind speeds. We're talking wind speeds in excess of 325 kilometers an hour, but also damage in combination with the excessive wind speeds. You have damage with wind speeds in a tornado in the 325 kilometer an hour or more frame. You get houses that are lifted completely off the foundations. So there's massive damage. Where the tornado goes through, everything is destroyed. Whole subdivisions are gone. The widths of tornadoes is much, much smaller than hurricanes. Generally, I think the largest recorded width of a hurricane was about 2.5 kilometers versus storms, which is for hurricanes, which is much, much, much greater. So the damage is more localized with tornadoes than with hurricanes. And I think that's about it for today, boys and girls.